You know that quiet moment when you realize you're not the same person you were a few years ago? Not in an obvious way, nothing dramatic, but something inside you feels rearranged. The things that once bothered you don't carry the same weight anymore. Conversations you used to tolerate now feel exhausting. Certain habits quietly fall away, and new ones appear almost without effort. And sometimes that shift can feel confusing. People around you might still see the same person they've always known. They expect the same reactions, the same interests, the same patterns. When those patterns begin to change, it could make others uncomfortable. Questions start appearing in subtle ways. Why are you different lately? Why do you seem quieter, or more distant, or more focused on yourself? What often gets labeled as inconsistency, moodiness, or even selfishness is sometimes something else entirely. It's a process that rarely gets explained clearly. The psychology of self-transformation. Most people imagine transformation as a sudden event, a breakthrough moment, a decision that instantly reshapes a life, but the mind rarely works that way. Real change is usually much quieter and much slower. Psychologists sometimes describe identity as a pattern of predictions your brain makes about who you are. Your nervous system builds these patterns over years of repeated experiences. The environments you grew up in, the roles you learned to play, the ways you adapted to other people's expectations, all of these become part of a kind of internal script. For a long time, that script has run automatically. Neuroscience research suggests that the brain relies heavily on established neural pathways to conserve energy. In simple terms, the mind prefers the familiar. Even when certain behaviors no longer serve you, they often remain because they once helped you survive or belong. That's why transformation rarely begins with motivation. It usually begins with friction. Something in your life starts to feel slightly misaligned. A conversation that used to feel normal suddenly feels draining. A routine that once felt safe begins to feel limiting. You might not even be able to explain why. The discomfort is subtle, almost like background noise, but your nervous system notices. Over time, those small signals accumulate. The brain begins updating its predictions. New neural pathways slowly begin to form as you experiment with different responses, boundaries, and priorities. And at first, these changes can feel strange even to you, because when the mind steps outside an old pattern, it temporarily loses its sense of certainty. That uncertainty is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like confusion or instability. But psychologically, it's often a sign that your brain is reorganizing the way it understands itself. Many forms of self-transformation actually begin much earlier than people realize. Often in childhood or early environments, certain parts of your personality were rewarded while others were discouraged. Over time, most people learn which version of themselves keeps things smooth, which reactions avoid conflict, which behaviors gain approval. Those adaptations become automatic. But as life expands, through new relationships, experiences, or responsibilities, the nervous system sometimes realizes that the old strategies no longer fit the present environment. What once protected you may now feel restrictive. And this is where transformation quietly begins, not as a rejection of who you were, but as an update. In psychology, this process is sometimes associated with cognitive restructuring, the gradual reshaping of beliefs and internal narratives. But in everyday life, it rarely feels like a structured process. It feels more like a series of realizations that arrive without warning. Moments where something inside you simply says, "This no longer feels like me." It's important to understand that this process isn't better or worse than staying consistent with who you've always been. Some people find stability in long-held identities, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Human minds adapt in different ways depending on their experiences, environments, and temperaments. Transformation is simply one path among many, and it carries its own trade-offs. One of the quieter paradoxes of self-transformation is that the more you change internally, the more certain relationships or environments may feel unfamiliar. People who once felt perfectly aligned with you might now seem slightly out of sync, not because anyone is wrong, but because the internal map you use to navigate the world has shifted. Growth sometimes creates distance before it creates clarity. But there's another side to this process that people rarely talk about. Transformation doesn't mean abandoning the person you used to be. In many ways, it means integrating them. The past versions of you were responses to real circumstances. They carried you through experiences your current self might not have handled yet. Every version had a purpose. When the mind transforms, it isn't erasing the past, it's reorganizing it. And that's why the process can feel strangely emotional at times. Not because something is wrong, but because your brain is reevaluating memories, meanings, and identities that once felt permanent. It's a quiet kind of reconstruction. So if you've ever felt that subtle shift inside you, the sense that something about your perspective is changing, even if you can't fully explain it yet, it may not be confusion at all. It may simply be your mind adjusting to a version of yourself that's still taking shape. There's nothing broken about that process. In fact, it's one of the ways the human mind adapts to life itself. And if this reflection felt familiar in some way, there are other quiet patterns in human psychology that reveal even more about how people evolve internally, patterns most of us experience without ever realizing what they mean.